Hi class, hope everyone's doing well here in week 3. I'm Jim Kopmeyer and here's my week 3 discussion post. So in the counseling profession, as we all know, there are many things that are disclosed between the counselor and the client that are very sensitive in nature. These are things that the client may, for any number of reasons, be hesitant to share or would not want anyone else to hear. So for this reason, we often hear the terms confidentiality and privileged communications associated with counseling. So although these two terms are related to the same concept, that being the protection of the client's privacy and that information the client would like to keep between, right there in the counseling section, these two terms, confidentiality and privileged communication, don't refer to the exact same thing. So, privileged communication is actually a legal term for information that is protected from being revealed in the court of law. So, in counseling, a client owns the right of privileged communication and can ordinarily, anyway, waive it at any time. Confidentiality, on the other hand, is the overarching ethical principle in the counseling profession, which demands that what is shared in counseling stays right there between the counselor and the client. So, by this principle, a counselor can't turn around and say one thing or another that the client revealed, or reveal the identity of a client, or anything like that. And again, this is just to protect the client's right to privacy. So there are a few limitations of confidentiality, of course. The first that I'm going to mention is if the client poses a threat of harm to himself or to others. So, for example, in the case of a client with suicidal ideation, that would be something that the counselor would need to assess. And if the counselor determines that there is a big concern here of potential suicide, then obviously the counselor needs to report that and hopefully have the client hospitalized to get the care that they need, and that's to protect the client's life. Similarly, if a client poses a threat, verbalizes a threat to someone else, maybe this is somebody who would like to impose some kind of violence on someone or kill somebody else. Obviously, the counselor then has a responsibility to warn the person or who could be harmed, to keep them out of harm's way. So not necessarily for the protection of the client, but the protection of somebody else who's in harm's way. So this next situation that wouldn't be covered under confidentiality that I'm going to discuss is very similar, and it has to do with if the counselor, in talking with the client, who is probably a child, would suspect any kind of abuse, child abuse or elder abuse. In this case, it's just the suspicion of the client, or of the counselor, that needs to be reported. And actually, counselors are, at least in the state of Ohio and many other places, they are mandated reporters, which means they have a legal obligation to report that suspicion of abuse, again, in order to protect the child or elder, whoever the counselor suspects is being abused. So it's important for clients to be made aware of the bounds of confidentiality. So for me, every new client, I would want to start with at least a brief overview of the ethical principles of confidentiality, and especially highlighting some of the most common exceptions to that. And here, models such as the one proposed by Fisher, 2008, would be very helpful. I would also provide a thoroughly written explanation which gets into more of the legalistic details, obviously as a part of informed consent, so that the client can have it, read it over, sign it, so that the client knows all the ins and outs they may need to know. And I think at the beginning of every session, it would just be a good practice to ask if the client has any questions about confidentiality or anything else they want to go over and have clarified. And so, looking at the laws of the state of Ohio, it's pretty straightforward. It's a lot of what we're learning because of Walsh's position in Ohio. There's mandated counselors are mandated reporters. The laws protect the client's right to confidentiality, and confidential information shall only be revealed when, on behalf of the when the client gives consent for that, or in situations that pose danger to self or others. All right. Hope everyone's having a good week. Thank you.